Last week, a protest was staged outside the building in which the hearings of this commission are taking place. This occurred on the 3 days on which Minister Pravin Gordhan was giving evidence in this commission. During that protest, certain statements were made concerning Mr. Gordhan and the head of the Commission's legal team, Mr. Paul Pretorius, SC. The statements included insults directed at Minister Gordhan and Mr. Pretorius. It has been necessary to secure the transcript of the proceedings in which those statements were made before one could deal with them. While this commission has no desire to get involved in any political disputes that may exist between Mr. Gordhan and any of his political rivals, this commission wants to make it clear that it is unacceptable for anybody to subject any witness appearing before it to any form of harassment or intimidation whatsoever. A witness who appears before this commission and gives evidence does so in order to help this commission with the matters that it is investigating, and such a witness acts in the public interest. If no witnesses were to give evidence before this commission, this country and the whole nation would not be able to get to know whether state capture occurred, how it occurred, who was involved in it, and its full extent. Nor will the people of South Africa know the true nature and extent of corruption that has engulfed our country, which this commission is required in terms of its terms of reference to investigate. Therefore, it would not be possible to determine the most appropriate measures that should be adopted in order to eliminate corruption, or at least to drastically reduce the levels of corruption in our country. I have, over a number of months, called upon past and present members of the National Executive, Directors General, and other government officials or employees who have knowledge of activities relating to state capture and corruption to come forward and assist the Commission with its work. Some of the past and present ministers have come forward to do so. These include Mr. Gordhan, Mr. Nene, Mr. Jonas, and Ms. Barbara Hogan. Indeed, this morning or today, we are going to hear the evidence of one of the present members of the National Executive, Mr. Mantashe. Any harassment of witnesses appearing before the Commission will deter other potential witnesses who otherwise may have wanted to come forward and give evidence and assist this Commission. This will seriously undermine the work of the Commission. I therefore urge all South Africans and all other people and organizations who are committed to a proper investigation of the allegations of state capture and the extent and nature of corruption in our country not to do anything that may jeopardize the prospects of success of this Commission's work. Any harassment of the personnel of this commission is also unacceptable. I take this opportunity to once again point out that anybody who has a complaint against any personnel of the commission or other persons assisting the commission is free to lodge their complaints with the commission, and the commission will consider such complaints properly and advise them of the outcome thereof. In this regard, I point out that the best way to get the evidence leaders of the commission to raise certain issues with witnesses is to furnish them with evidence concerning what that witness is alleged to have done, so that the witness may be called upon to deal with those issues or allegations. It does not help the commission nor the country for a person who has evidence implicating a witness appearing before this commission to keep that evidence away from the commission and not hand it over to the commission. Anyone who has evidence of any corruption falling within the terms of reference of this commission, or who has evidence of acts of state capture, which he or she believes is credible, should hand it over to the commission. Otherwise, if he or she fails to hand it over, many people will believe that he or she does not believe that that evidence is credible and will stand the scrutiny before this commission. This commission will not consider what is said outside of the commission and in the media if it is not brought inside the commission. Minister Gordhan came to give evidence in the commission voluntarily and was prepared to have his evidence tested by way of cross-examination. Anyone who has credible evidence concerning any alleged wrongdoing on his part should himself or herself come forward and present that evidence. This commission is fully conscious of the enormity of the assignment given to it and is ever aware that it is required to try and complete its work as soon as possible. It must not allow itself to be distracted, but must focus on the work it is called upon to perform. For now, the Commission will not itself be laying any complaints with the police so that it can continue to focus on the work it is called upon to do. When in breach of the regulations of this Commission, the media published witnesses' statements before those witnesses gave evidence before the Commission, and without the written permission of the chairperson, which is a criminal offense in terms of the regulations, this Commission did not immediately lay any complaints with the police. And in this case, this Commission will not lay any complaint with the police at this stage, but will monitor the situation and the conduct of various people in regard to the Commission and in regard to witnesses who appear before it. And when it considers it appropriate to do so, it will not hesitate to lay a complaint with the police. It is important that this Commission and all its personnel are given space to focus on the national assignment that it has been given and to do its job without any distractions. In this regard, I do want to emphasize that anyone who has complaints against members of the legal team or members of the investigation team should once again feel free to lodge complaints and those will be considered properly. And if there is any misconduct on the part of anybody, the Commission will deal with that appropriately. Until evidence has been placed before the Commission which reflects that any one of the members of the legal team of the Commission has been involved in any misconduct or unacceptable conduct, I, as the chairperson of the Commission, continue to have confidence in the whole legal team of the Commission, including its head, Mr. Pretorius. I continue to have confidence also in the investigation team, and until there is evidence placed before me which I assess to reveal misconduct or unacceptable conduct, I will continue to accept that they may continue with their work. This Commission will continue to do all it can to encourage persons who have information relating to the matters that it is investigating to come forward and share their evidence with the Commission in the interests of the nation and in the interest of establishing the issues that this Commission is investigating. It is hoped that from now on, all concerned will allow the Commission the space it needs to do its work and to support its work. But any harassment and intimidation of any witness in this Commission, and this Commission will continue to look at how it can protect all those who appear before it in order to assist it. One of the statements that was made last week in the protest that took place outside this building was a statement to the effect that this Commission decided to use this building without looking at the possibility of using government buildings, or a statement was made that this Commission should have been using government halls or government venues in order to reduce costs. I just wish to make it clear that after I had been appointed as chairperson of this Commission, I gave an instruction that those who would be looking for the venue that the Commission would use, which was Public Works and the Department of Justice, assisted by the Secretary of the Commission, I made it clear to them that the preference should be to use government venues so that we would reduce costs. Indeed, I was told that various government venues were inspected and for one reason or another were either are not available or not suitable. I will mention some of these that were considered. They are Sporal Park Office Building in Centurion, Mzwanele Municipal Building, Centurion, Kempton Park Civic Center, Kempton Park, Emoyeni Conference Center, Parktown, Johannesburg State Theatre, Braamfontein. So I just want to make it clear that this Commission and Public Works and the Department of Justice did not simply go for a privately owned building without exploring the possibility of saving costs and using a government venue. But on the report that was given to me, none of the places that were looked at was available or was suitable for the needs of the Commission. That is the statement I wanted to make, and that is the end of that statement. Thank you, Mr. Maleka. We may continue.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Manyi, if we could just orientate ourselves where we were yesterday. We ended when we were discussing the various revenue earned by entities that compete for government business in regard to government advertisement spend. I'd like to start elsewhere this morning, if you don't mind. And I'd like to start with your explanation. You have adequately
Mr. Manyi.
How it was shown that lies to have project. For instance, and the national news for that specific, quickly just directly to City or Sunday Times or whoever, as opposed to go to their central place, which does that. So this is what happens in that case. So the fact that we have 199,000 or something is a total misrepresentation of amount of money that goes to City Press. And as I said, a lot of it is in that central figure of S24. So that's a clarification I wanted to give, Chair.
Okay. Mr. Maleka, do you want to take
Chair, can I, with your leave, follow up on this because it is going outside the context and the business of where the Commission is. Mr. Manyi, can I make it quite clear that the questions that I asked of you yesterday and the answer that you gave yesterday related to the figures that you produced about only that part of revenue and by competing newspapers from one source of revenue, and that is the government's expenditure on advertising through the GCIS. I'm not asking all you to deal with issues relating to other source of revenue by the newspapers. Are we at one on that score?
I think you're missing the point. The point here, Chair, is that all those line items items that are there. It's money from GCIS. All that is money routed through GCIS. So I'm saying sometimes you get a direct, let's say even GCIS would do a direct city press
Transaction.
yes, an ad hoc. Those are other, let me characterize them as ad hoc placements in those other newspapers, as opposed to your general campaigns that you do, and then when you do that, then you speak to the consolidating house, as in Ads 24 or whatever is other group company. So all of them is still from GTIS. So I'm not understanding why Mr. Malega is struggling to understand this simple point.
Chair, I will deal with it on the assumption that Mr. Manyi's context is correct. I don't want to waste time. I will assume that the clarification he has given confirms the figures that he has produced and which he accepts they are correct. So I will deal with that issue on that approach. But with your leave, that's where I don't want to start this morning. I want to start elsewhere this morning.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, just to go back to where I think we should start this morning. You recall that yesterday you indicated to the chairperson that the information you have now presented, especially page 229 of Exhibit M1, resolved all of the questions that we raised with you about your transfer. You recall that you said that yesterday to the chairperson.
Yes, I do, Chair.
I'm afraid you did not resolve some questions that we would like to explore with you, if you don't mind. You answered our query with reference to Section 12(1) of the Public Service Act. But we would like to ask you some few questions around the lawful requirements for a lawful transfer of a Director General, such as you were, and a Director General, such as Mr. Maseko at the time. We have placed before you an exhibit bundle as F1. Chair, that is the bundle of Ms. Williams' testimony. We have asked your registrar to bring it for you this morning and place it before you.
I've got a number of exhibits with red covers here. Registrar, which one is it? Okay, I've got it. Exhibit F1.
Indeed, Chair. Mr. Manyi, do you have Exhibit F1 before you?
Earlier on, I had, but now I've got H1 to H5.
Can I ask colleagues to place a copy of Exhibit before you? May transfer component of form function or any other department in a of equal, higher or lower grading or additional to the establishment as the President considers appropriate. And as I understand the testimony of Mr. Manyi yesterday, is that his transfer was lawful because the President considered appropriate to transfer him. Now, Mr. Manyi, can I ask you to go to page 76? And ask you to consider with me what subparagraph D of section 12.3 of the PSA provides. And let me read it together with you, Chair. A transfer in terms of this subsection may only occur, and I emphasize the phrase only occur, if, Roman 1, the relevant head of a department consents to the transfer, or after due consideration of any representation by the head, the transfer is in the public interest. Do you see that, Mr. Manyi?
Yes, I do.
I take it that you have worked with this legislation and you know what it requires to justify a lawful transfer, correct?
Yeah, Chairperson, I'm not understanding what is it that is not clear here. In my input yesterday, I did indicate that I had a discussion with Mr. Chabane. So in terms of Roman figure 1, in terms of the conditions that Mr. Maleka is reading here, where the relevant head of department consents to the transfer, which is me, I consented to the transfer. So I'm not understanding what is outstanding on this matter.
Yes, let him put his question. Mr. Maleka, put your question.
Let me start where I thought I had started and repeat the question. And frankly, ask Mr. Manyi to answer that question, rather than anticipate what I might not ask. And the question simply was, this is not the first time you see this provision. As the head of the department, you must have seen it, you must have considered it in your lifetime as a Director General of more than one department. Is that a fair summary of what you should know about this legislation?
I note that, but it's not necessarily true, Chairperson, because it talks about transfer. So when you are appointed in a department, I don't think issues of transfer is something that comes top of your mind. So it's not an automatic something that you preoccupy yourself with.
So would you say you may or may not have seen it at the time you were Director General of one department or another, but you can't really remember, there was no issue that may have required you to focus on it?
Correct, that's a correct summary.
Okay.
Whether you have seen it before or not, you will then accept that one of the most important requirements for a lawful transfer is that you should have consented, correct?
I did say I did consent, so...
No, Mr. Manyi, we'll get to the point and we'll explore it to see whether or not you consented. The question is different. And the different question is this. A lawful transfer under section 12.3 would, in the first instance, require the consent of the affected Director General, correct?
Proceed.
Well, Mr. Manyi, you may, if the question, if you think the question is legal and you're not a lawyer, you are uncomfortable committing yourself, you can indicate that you think it's something legal, but if you think it's simple, you can answer it, you can answer it. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, Chairperson, D has got two Roman figures. It's either or. So when a question is asked in the manner that is asked, as if there's only one answer to the question, it creates a confusion, because you can be transferred, in terms of my understanding of what I read here, Roman figure 2, if it's in the public interest. You may not yourself consent to it, but a call can be made that is in public interest. So when I'm asked a question when I'm asked a question as if there's only one answer, I just feel that it's sort of inappropriate.
No, well, let me just say this, Mr. Manyi. Just feel at ease. If you are asked a question, as you say it, your understanding that there are two scenarios, but you are asked in a manner which you think suggests there is one. Feel free to say that can be the case, but it can also be another case. Just feel free and answer as you see the question.
Yes, but then Mr. Maleka is going to blame me for not answering straight.
Well, I will watch. So
as indicated in Roman figure 1 and Roman figure 2.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Mr. Maleka.
Well, Chair, let me try and follow that answer. And I hope that it is important for the Commission not simply to accept the answer because it's given, but to probe whether or not the answer makes meaningful sense in the light of the Commission's pursuit for the truth. Yeah. Now, Mr. Manyi, as I understand your answer, you say that the requirement is not singular in relation to the need for consent. You're suggesting that you may be transferred without your consent for as long as it's in the public interest.
Yeah, that's my understanding of Roman figure 2, which did not apply to me. My specific situation, which I here to respond to, is Roman figure 1. The other provisions, I'm not the employer. And I can't speak for other people, I can only speak for myself. So myself, Roman figure 1 addresses my issue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, I understand it. So on that premise, I'm willing to accept that if you don't consent, those who want to effect a lawful transfer as absent your consent, they must show that that lawful transfer is in the public interest. And I raise this question because you would recall that the transfer of Mr. Manyi was not without context. It was what we previously referred to as a cross transfer. It is in that context that we are exploring the issue. So these requirements will apply, but for now, Mr. Manyi, you would recall that your transfer took place in the context of the transfer of Mr. Maseko out of the GCIS, because without the transfer of Mr. Maseko out of the GCIS, you would not have been lawfully transferred to the GCIS as his replacement, correct?
Well, I'm not sure if that's fair, Mr. Maleka. You say you want him to say whether without the consent of Mr. Maseko, his own transfer would have been lawful.
No, I'm not saying that, Chair.
Okay, what are you saying?
I'm saying that as a matter of fact, you could not have two heads of the GCIS.
Oh, okay. Well, if you put it that way, that's fine. But that's not what I'd had.
Yes, no, I'm sorry, Chair. I apologize if I did not.
All right.
Mr. Manyi, I mean, it is fair to suggest to you that you cannot have the two heads of the GCIS at the same time, correct?
No, I mean, that's an obvious question. You can't, Chair, but I had provided cabinet statement. In that cabinet statement, in my initial response, I had provided a cabinet statement where these matters were dealt with. Cabinet noted that Mr. Maseko is being transferred to the PSA. Cabinet noted that Mr. Manyi is going to replace Mr. Maseko. So I'm not understanding this line of question.
Maybe let me ask this question. Were you aware whether Mr. Maseko was to be transferred to another department?
Chairperson, that could never arise. I would never know.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no way that I would have ever known as to what is happening.
Yes. Well, of course, you could have known if Mr. Chaba you would go to.
Yeah. No, Chairperson, Minister Chabane was a very honorable person. There was no way. And also was very meticulous in terms of his modus operandi on a whole range of issues. He's a very strict, disciplined person. And I accepted that when Minister Chabane came to say that there is this kind of an opportunity for me to go into this space, that they've taken care of everything else to enable that to happen. But it's not my call. And I think if I began to probe him, I would have been out of order. It would appear that I'm doubting his competence.
No, Mr. Manyi. You said that you could not have known.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying to you is that you could have known if he had chosen to tell you more than what he told you.
Yes,
do you accept that?
Okay, I accept that.
Yes.
But I don't think
in this case, you say he did not tell you.
And I don't think he had an obligation to tell me, Chair.
Yes. No, leave the obligation aside,
Okay.
just factually.
Okay.
He did not tell you.
No.
Yes. Okay.
And Mr. Manyi, at the level of fact, you knew at that point in time that Mr. Maseko was the head of the GCIS. I mean, he was your colleague, at the same employment rank, correct?
Yes, I did.
Yes. To get back to the requirements of paragraph D, you say that you consented to the transfer.
Yes.
And you seem to suggest that page 229 of Exhibit M1 manifests that consent. Is that your suggestion? Page 229, Exhibit M1.
M1.
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, that's confirmation.
No, I see that it is confirmation of your transfer, but there is not, as far as I read it, an indication that you have
I'm sorry,
consented.
Mr. Maleka, just raise your voice. I can't hear you.
My apologies, Chair. We are at page 229.
Yes.
The question is, I have looked at that letter, Chair, and I can assure you that I've read it more than once. I have not come across any indication in that letter that you consent to the transfer. Are you able to indicate to us, Mr. Manyi, what part of that letter the chairperson should read as an expression of your consent for the transfer?
Yeah, no, Chairperson, how the process works that Mr. Maleka might not be aware of is that the releasing minister and the receiving minister, they concur. And then there's something called a presidential minute that is put together. in that presidential minute, all the issues that is raising get contained in there to regularize the movements. So once the presidential minute is done, all those questions are contained in the letter that advises me that now you're going this way. So if Mr. Maleka is looking for that kind of an answer, he's looking at the wrong document. And the people that will hold that document will be the presidency. They will have the presidential, it's called the presidential minute. It will have that detail he's looking for.
Well, let me ask you this question. How did you convey your consent to the transfer? Was it verbal or was it in writing?
No, I think, like I said, Chair, that with the discussion, I agreed on the spot with the minister. And yeah.
In other words, your consent was verbal?
It was verbal, yes, Chair.
Thank you.
On that premise, Mr. Maseko told the chairperson the context in which he was told by the late Minister Chabani how he would be moved out of the GCIS. And Chair, I'm not going to bore you with those details, but the key point of concern is this, that Mr. Manyi has now referred to a concurrence which is recorded in a cabinet document of some sort, as between the transferring and the receiving ministers. But you would recall that Mr. Maseko said that he was told to go to the Department of, is it Public Administration?
Public Service Administration.
Yes, Public Service Administration. And his minister was not even too concerned about his presence there. And in fact, he had to leave at some point because the minister did not think that he wanted the DG. And that's the point of the inquiry.
Yes, well, I'm not sure Mr. Manyi might be able to assist you with that. He has said that as far as his transfer was concerned from the Department of Labor to GCIS, he gave his consent verbally. And he has said, as I understand his evidence, he has said that when there is a transfer such as the one that took place, he understands that there would be a presidential minute where the issues that you are raising, which I assume include the issue of consent and maybe public interest, if that applies, would be dealt with.
Yes.
But I'm allowing you to...
No, Chair, I think I will conclude that line of questioning on the note that, Mr. Manyi, as far as your discussion with Minister Chabani is concerned, it did not deal at all with the requirement for transfer on the grounds of public interest, correct?
No. And also, Chair, as it relates to Mr. Maseko, I'm the wrong person to be asked.
Mr. Manyi, the next issue that I'd like to raise with you relates to your statement in response to Ms. Williams' testimony, especially that part of your statement where you challenged and criticized Ms. Williams' testimony about when you took over as the head of the GCIS. May I ask you in that regard, if you don't mind, to go to Exhibit M. And Chair, if you could turn to page 7 of Exhibit M.
Thank you.
And Ms. Manyi, you'll see that in paragraph 5.1, you say the 3rd of February was my first day as CEO in brackets, Director General of GCIS, and as a cabinet spokesperson. The submission by Ms. Williams stating that Mr. Temba Maseko left GCIS in January 2011 is false. You see that?
Yes.
And when you testified earlier on in your, I think it was the 14th of November, you went at length to criticize Ms. Williams about that part of his evidence. You remember that?
I was setting the record straight. I don't, which say criticize, I don't know. I was not dealing with her, I was dealing with the facts. I just stated the facts as I know them. Yes.
I wonder whether you had an occasion to listen to Ms. Williams' entire testimony. You would recall that she testified over 2 days. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
She testified, Chair, on the 30th of August and resumed her evidence on the 3rd of September. And in fairness to Ms. Williams, on the 3rd of September, she was asked to clarify that part of the question, especially the date around which Mr. Maseko left GCIS and Mr. Manyi took over. I can take you there, Mr. Manyi, if it's necessary. But I take that you had watched also the second day of Ms. Williams' testimony. Is that a fair assumption to make?
No, it's not a fair assumption. I didn't watch the second day.
Right.
I watched the 31st only when it related to the part that I needed to respond to.
On the second day, Ms. Williams corrected her testimony. We have asked your registrar to place before you the transcript go and you're not aware. (2011)
Okay.
Chair, I can
you have GIS.
the first, and now you say 2nd of February. There's no give and take. The date is the 3rd. So even the second correction is still wrong. It was on the 3rd.
Thank you.
The next issue I'd like to raise with you concerning your statement and criticism of Ms. Williams begins at page 23 of the same bundle.
Can I just ask something quickly?
Yeah.
I know that this commission does not operate strictly according to court processes.
Yes.
But usually in court processes, when you have an affidavit that is from an applicant, then you get a response, then you get a reply. Now, it looks like Ms. Williams has submitted a reply affidavit, so to speak, but I was not provided this reply affidavit that talked to my issues. Now, Mr. Maleka is busy giving me all kinds of surprises now with information that I was never provided.
Well, I don't know about another affidavit, but based on what he read out a few minutes ago, from what he was reading out from as a correction by Ms. Williams of an earlier evidence that she had given, he was reading from a transcript of the evidence that was recorded electronically in this commission when she gave evidence on the 3rd. In other words, as far as that one is concerned, he's not basing it on any affidavit, simply saying if you go back to her evidence before this commission on the 3rd of September, as reflected in the transcript that he has, she did clarify.
Yes, Chair, the point I'm making, Chair, is that coming to this day, I had all the documents I had to consider. And now, if Mr. Maleka knew that this is also part of the documentation I needed to have in preparation for my responses here, I think I should have been given even that transcript if he was going to refer to it as it was, so that I don't. He's not the only one. Right now, even the transcript is reading. I don't even have a copy of it, even as we speak.
Well, he is supposed to have made sure that there is a copy of the transcript in front of you. He has indicated that I was supposed to have it. I'm supposed to have it, but as you may have observed, he said he would just read it from what he had, and it's a small-ish, it's a small portion. So I don't think it's something that should really be very contentious. Did you have a copy of the transcript for the witness, Mr. Maleka?
Yes, I asked the attorneys to place it before him. But secondly, Chair, lest there be a misunderstanding. In one of the letters where the commission was sending to Mr. Manyi to prepare himself on this and other issues, he was expressly told about the testimony of Mr. Maseko and Ms. Williams and the transcripts of that testimony and how he could get them and access them on the Commission's website. So it is not as if we're taking him by surprise.
Well, I'm not aware of anything that should make this a big issue.
Yes.
You say that you arrived at GCIS on the 3rd of February. She says she had initially given another date, I think in January. She then clarified and corrected herself and said, as I understand from what Mr. Maleka has read, it was on the 2nd of February. Unless there's something that I've missed, I don't think it should really be a big issue whether it was the 2nd or the 3rd. You know, we can just move on.
Yes, Chair, I'd like to move on with your permission. Mr. Manyi, I am dealing with the second issue arising from your statement. Is at page 23. And you would recall that from that page, flowing to the next two other pages, you deal with the question of the text that you sent to Ms. Williams when she testified on the 30th of August. And as I recall your testimony, you accept that it is as a fact true that you sent a text in the middle of a testimony. There is no debate in that regard, correct?
Yeah, no, there's no argument. If a chairperson during break is still in the middle of the testimony, which is when I sent it, yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Chair, all I want to establish are the few debate. I'm going to ask you some factual questions around that matter, which is common cause. When you sent that text to Ms. Williams, you were already aware and had received a notice from the Commission's attorney that Ms. Williams would be testifying from the 30th of August, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the notice told you of the rights you had, including your right to present your version under oath. You read that part of the notice, correct?
Yes.
And my recollection is that the notice was sent to you on the 17th of August. In other words, almost 13 days before Ms. Williams testified.
Yes.
And you would have been aware that at the right moment, you would be entitled to respond fully to Ms. Williams' evidence under oath.
Yeah, Chairperson,
Yes.
Can I just say that yesterday, when I was explaining the circumstances of this matter, I alluded to the fact that I thought what I was trying to correct was actually did not even amount to a materiality thing in terms of what was happening. Because all I was trying to do, I knew that I was coming to respond to the substantive issues, as it were. I didn't see this actually as a substantive issue, as it were. I just thought it's just something that, because also, Chair, as I explained, is that some of these mistakes in the rollout of the other people as they do things get picked up real time, and for serious damage that they cause to a person's reputation, which you don't recover 14 days later. So it's something that I thought needed to be corrected real time, and it was not material, and it was factual. That when you mentioned the name of Mr. Mzwanele Manyi, he came in 2013. So I thought she would actually have appreciated that. I was not trying to distort or do anything, but just make sure that as she does things here, it must just be within the right time frames. That's all.
Thank you.
Last question on this, Chair. Mr. Manyi, my difficulty is this. By the time Mrs. Williams gives testimony and you feel compelled to correct her, or you feel compelled that he should say something more about that testimony, on your version, he had already committed a critical mistake you identify as false about when you started as the head of the GCIS. So on your approach, that was not the first mistake or false statement she mentioned in her oral testimony. Why did you not consider to correct her by SMS when she committed the first mistake? When the second mistake you describe as not being material? Is there any reason why you did not choose to correct her by SMS?
Yeah, no, Chairperson, I was told how the process works. that I'm going to have the opportunity to respond substantively. And I was actually given the affidavit beforehand. So I knew the areas of contention. And the reason I didn't respond to those areas of contention is because I was going to get the opportunity to respond to them properly. This arises out of oral evidence. And even there, it was actually, in my view, I do say that, I did say in my affidavit that what happened is that I did say that the evidence leader was patently clear with the areas that she was probing, which was paragraph 14 to 16 of Ms. Pumla Williams's affidavit. She was done with it. She was moving on to paragraph 17 on other matters. And once she was there, then she began to ask about what other changes were there. So that was a change. That was something that even in the correspondence from the commission was not a matter that I was seized with. It was a developing matter, and it developed out of pure accident, if you like, which I thought I can just resolve.
Well, Mr. Maleka, I'm not sure whether you have in mind that you would suggest that the explanation that Mr. Manyi has given for sending that text message to Ms. Williams while she was giving evidence is false, or that he was actually trying to get Ms. Williams to give untrue evidence, because if that's not the intention, I'm not sure that the time that we have shouldn't be used for other areas that may be more important. I can just say that at this stage, subject to what you or the legal team of the Commission may say, my prima facie view is that the explanation that Mr. Manyi has given is acceptable. And unless, obviously, if you later wish to persuade me differently, I would look at that. But it seems to me that it's something that we shouldn't spend too much time on.
Yes, Chair. I ask these questions because you asked us to probe this question. Secondly, yes. I raise this issue because
yes.
You
No. You are right. Yeah, you are right. I had asked. That was, I think, of course, before I read his explanation.
Yes.
And after I read his explanation and had his evidence, I didn't convey anything to you.
I must conclude on this because there are other important matters to deal with. But I ask this in order to protect the integrity of the Commission's processes.
Yes. Okay. No, that's fine.
So that all and sundry must understand that it is inappropriate to interrupt witnesses' evidence, especially when they have received notices that where they're implicated, they will have a proper opportunity to set out their full version in response. Can I move on, Chair?
Yes, you may move on.
Mr. Manyi, the next topic that I'd like to raise with you, and again I do so in the interest of trying to establish the truth, is your response to Ms. Williams' version when you characterized her evidence as a corrupt empire equivalent to the VBS, which you had to dismantle. You recall that?
Yes, I do.
I'd like to establish some facts, Chair. And I'm not going to go into a debate about whether Mr. Manyi's description is correct or not. All I want to do is to establish the facts. Mr. Manyi, as I understand, and from the investigation that the Commission's investigators had conducted, when you came in as the head of GCIS, you re-appointed Ms. Williams and to continue as the head of, or the chairperson of the bid adjudication committee, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And by that time, when you appointed her to continue, you had been aware of the Treasury report around allegations of improper procurement of the 3 companies that you had identified with reference to stats as a procurement.
Incorrect, Chair. The report of National Treasury came 1st of November 2012. I left the department 25th August 2012. So it's not correct.
So when did you come to the conclusion that you have inherited this mini VBS bank?
The reason we instituted the reason we instituted an investigation, Chair, is because we had prima facie evidence of a malfeasance of sorts. And this is why we got the investigation going. Now, why is the investigation going? Because we are rule of law people. You have to presume people innocent until proven guilty, and so on. So I didn't presume anybody guilty, so to speak. But at the same time, I had to do some precautionary measures, as it were, to make sure that we root out the malfeasance that was patently clear, but we also needed to get proper confirmation from a proper investigation.
When did you come to the conclusion that you have inherited a VBS type of an operation?
In 2011, sometime, I don't remember the date.
You can't give us a date that we can work on, a month, even if it's an estimation.
I can't give the date. I think the time when the change was made to dismantle, around that period, that is when I had sufficient information to say we can't continue like this. I gave the process a chance, and asking people, even our own internal investigations, by the way, they did also ensue and all that. So whilst we were waiting for formal reports from National Treasury and elsewhere, but also did our own little probing that to understand what was happening. So it must have been maybe then, at the end of that process, maybe towards the end of the year, that one was sufficiently informed to say, we have to change this.
Mr. Manyi, shall we proceed on the premise that when you decided to dismantle the bid adjudication committee, you then took out Ms. Williams and she no longer chaired that committee, you appointed a new chairperson, correct?
Yes, and 4 members. It was 4 people that were removed and replaced.
In the bundle that we gave to you to prepare yourself, we included National Treasury's directive on a lawful composition of the bid adjudication committee of an entity such as the GCIS. I take it that you have read the directive. I take it that you knew it even before we enclosed it in the documentation handed to you. It is on page 14 of Exhibit M1.
Thank you.
So if you're there, Mr. Manyi, and this is National Treasury speaking, it's not me or the investigating team or the commission. In paragraph 8.1, the directive requires the following. The Departmental Bid Adjudication Committee will comprise of members appointed by the accounting officer or his or her delegate through the acquisition policy and delegations. So the directive requires that you should establish a bid adjudication committee as the accounting officer. But then it says the following: the composition of the committee will be as follows: chairperson, DCO.CS. And it is common cause that Ms. Williams was occupying that office of DCEO at the time when you took her out of that bid adjudication committee, correct?
Yeah.
So when you reconstituted the bid adjudication committee, you would have acted inconsistent with this directive when you excluded her from not only being a member, but also the chair of the committee, correct?
No, incorrect. I think, Chairperson, this is a simplistic approach that is taken. Also, this page I have here, this page 14, it would have been good to have seen the cover page of this. There's nothing even here that says directive. I'm not really sure what I'm looking at, but be that as it may, the accounting officer, the duties of the accounting office, clearly spelled out in section 38 of the PFMA. Now, if in my view, whatever arrangement I found, which might have followed a particular guideline, I found that not to be achieving the purpose it was intended for. Nothing stops me to rearrange it in a manner that is going to deliver the objectives of the PFMA. So the changes that I brought in restructuring this committee, they did not flout a regulation. They did not flout a law. It could have been not in line with a particular guideline of sorts, but guideline is not a regulation. It guides you, but if you have something better, you can improve on a guideline. It's a guideline. You don't have, you're not fixed on it. It's not a law.
Chair, we will leave the rest for argument. The provisions of that directive are clear to me. I won't pursue the issue. I think I have established such facts as I need to later make arguments on these matters. Mr. Manyi, the next issue that we would like to raise with you, and you must tell us whether you are comfortable in dealing with it, relates to the investigation that the Commission's investigators had done. And that investigation revealed that you received 2 CVs of persons. And Chair, we have placed those CVs before you. We have redacted the names of the persons concerned so that there ought not to be an unkind disclosure of their details. We can assure you, Chair, that before we thought we should raise these issues, we did write to the person concerned about this matter and afforded them an opportunity to be present or exercise whatever rights they have in terms of the rules. So on that premise, Mr. Manyi, can I proceed and ask you some matters of fact in relation to the CVs concerned? My understanding of your evidence up to this point is that you claim that it would be inappropriate for us to ask questions about those CVs because you received them when you were a private person and not an employee of government, and that there's nothing wrong for you to receive CVs from other private persons. Is that a first summary of what you have said thus far concerning the CVs?
It's a half summary, the full summary, Chairperson.
Oh, before you give the other half of the summary, Mr. Maleka, where are you now?
Chair, I'm at M1,
Yeah.
page 58.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Mr. Manyi.
Yeah. Because